everyone. Thank you very much for this opportunity. Today I have the chance to share with you all my PhD project. I'm currently in the third year of my PhD, and my research is focused on the interaction between pollinators and people, specifically in private urban green areas, so residential gardens and allotment gardens in Newcastle upon Tyne. But before introducing my PhD research, I also quickly introduce myself. As you can hear from my accent, I'm not British, but I'm from Italy. I've been studying both my bachelor's and master's degree in environmental biology in Turin, in the northwest of Italy. And during my master's studies, especially, I've been gained a lot of experience in project about insects, specifically about butterflies, and I've been mainly working both in alpine areas but also in cities, specifically in the city of Turin, through some citizen science projects, including green infrastructure in the city of Turin, pollinators monitoring, and also the involvement of fragile people, disadvantaged people as mental health users in butterflies activities. I also had the chance to take part in a Butterfly Conservation Scotland trainship a few years ago, and I've been recently been part of the Connecting Schools with Nature project with the British Ecological Societies as an environmental educator. As I mentioned, I started about 2 years ago, a PhD at Northumbria University, and my supervisors are Catherine Baldock, Mark Goddard, and Alistair Scott, that you maybe know from previous talks. So this is just a quick introduction about pollinators. So as you probably know, pollination by insects plays a very important role in plants' reproduction, and the value of pollination has been estimated to be 153 billion per year, with almost 84% of crop species and 78% of wildflowers that are pollinated, at least in parts, by insects. However, as you surely know, pollinating insects are declining, and one of the main causes is represented by habitat loss that is also due to the increasing urbanization. Indeed, nowadays over 50% of the world population lives in cities, and this trend is going to increase in the next few years, as you can see from this map that shows the expected urban population growth in millions until 2050. In this map, the numbers that you can see also represent the number of pollinator studies in urban landscape in each country or area. It's quite clear from the map that more developed and temperate countries or areas like Europe, for example, European countries or the United States of America count a high number of pollinator studies in cities, while developing and tropical countries are definitely underrepresented. However, even if cities represent a source of habitat loss for pollinators, recent studies in the UK have been proved that allotment gardens and residential gardens, occupying about the 30% of urban areas, can act as pollinator hotspots, providing resources for pollinating insects, and specifically floral resources. So this is another recent studies specifically focused on flowers in cities, in which the researchers compare both flower abundance and richness, so both the number of flowers and the number of flower species in 9 different typologies of green areas in the cities. And as you can see from this graph, both residential gardens and allotment gardens contain higher floral abundance and floral richness compared to all the other urban green areas, for example, park, nature reserves, cemeteries, or other kind of urban green areas. So they can really potentially be a good habitat for pollinators in cities. The horticultural flora obviously is influenced by human preferences, and socioeconomic factors can be represented using the SES, the socioeconomic status, that is a complex measurement that is related to, for example, job, ethnicity, income, and other socioeconomic variables. Changes in the socioeconomic status can lead to the unequal distribution of natural resources across the city among different socioeconomic groups. And one emerging hypothesis is the luxury effect, which basically posits that neighborhoods with a higher socioeconomic status have higher biodiversity than neighborhoods with lower socioeconomic status. So basically, healthier, wealthier neighborhood has a higher number of species of insects in this case, but in general biodiversity than lower socioeconomic status neighborhood. Moreover, socioeconomic status can obviously also influence the people's perception of pollinators. So what people think about insects, for example, and how they consider them, if they value or not value them. And recent research also are trying to find a connection between the perception that people have of nature and human well-being. So basically, this is sort of graph that tries to summarize my PhD studies, that tries to work at the interface between ecological and socioeconomic factors affecting urban pollinators in urban gardens, urban residential gardens, and allotment gardens. So I'm trying to evaluate all the ecological drivers, among which the number, obviously, of pollinators in the cities and the number and abundance and richness of flowers. And I'm trying to investigate how these ecological drivers are affected by the socioeconomic ones, among which I'm considering a wide range of variables, for example, socio-demographic information related to each plot holders and allotment owners, typology and frequencies of garden management practices, and the perception that people have of pollinator and if there can be a connection with their self-reported human well-being. So during my first year of PhD, so in 2021, I carried out a pilot study, so just an exploratory study involving only a few sites in Newcastle upon Tyne. So over a total of 69 allotment gardens in Newcastle, I selected 4 of them along a deprivation gradient using this index of multiple deprivation. It is basically a data set that the UK government releases about every 10 years together with the census data. And I created 4 categories of deprivation that in the map are, in the map you can see the city is Newcastle upon Tyne, obviously, and different regions are colored in different colors according to the index of deprivation. So blue means more deprived, so lower socioeconomic status. Yellow means less deprived, so higher socioeconomic status. So I created 4 categories and selected 1 allotment in each. Last year, in 2022, I carried out my main studies after the pilot study, involving a higher number of sites, both allotment gardens and residential gardens this time. So the site selection process is a bit complicated, but overall, this time I created 3 categories of deprivation, in which, and then I randomly choose in the city 11 allotment gardens and 11 neighborhoods. In each allotment gardens, I selected 5 plots, in each neighborhood 5 gardens. So in total, I have 55 plots and 55 residential gardens involved. So what I've been done in each allotment garden, in each plot, and in each residential garden. Basically, in each site, I draw 2 short transects that basically are 2 short paths that I've been walking about once a month from July to October last year. And along each transect, I've been recording all the insects that I've seen, so both the number of insects and the number of the species of insects that I've seen on flowers. And I also recorded counted the total number of flowers and the flower species present in the garden or in the plot. About socioeconomic data collection, after piloting a questionnaire in 2021, last year I developed an online questionnaire that I spread just in December 2022 among all the plot holders and residential gardens owner involved in the ecological sampling. The aim of the questionnaire is to collect a wide range of data, among which socio-economic, socio-demographic and economic information of each participant, typology and frequencies of management practices of the garden, also, for example, the presence of wildlife-friendly features in the garden or in the plot. There's a section about the perception that people have of pollinators, so, for example, how many insect of some group they think they've seen during the season, or why and how they value or not value pollinating the insects in their garden. And the last section about self-reported human well-being, where I ask people basically about their relationship between their garden or their plot, so how they feel about their garden or their plot. Now, I will just give you a quick overview of my results. I still have to carry out my main data analysis, so this is just a very broad overview of what I've been collecting last year. So I recorded a total of 1,639 plant-pollinator interaction, and I collected with almost double of the recording in allotment gardens compared to residential gardens. As you can see from this very general graph, bumblebees, honeybees, and diptera, so flies, have been most commonly seen visiting flower compared to, for example, butterflies, beetles, or solitary bees. In this graph, I will show you, or all these histograms show always value of insect number or flower number along the deprivation gradient. So the colors are always the one that I mentioned. Blue means more deprived area, and yellow means less deprived area. So in opposition to what happens regarding the number of insects, about the number of flowers, I found a higher number of flowers in residential gardens overall compared to allotment gardens. Looking at the general graph, is not very clear if there is a trend along the deprivation gradient or not, probably not. It's true that the more deprived areas usually have a lower number, both of insects and of flowers in both allotment garden and residential garden, but there is not a clear trend along the deprivation gradient. Instead, if we talk about the number of species of insects and of flowers, the situation is a bit different. So in allotment gardens, I found 111 insect species and 80 species in residential gardens, while regarding flowers, I found 469 flower species in allotments and 557 flower species in residential gardens. In this case, it's more clear that there could be a trend along the deprivation gradient, because all the graphs show like an increasing trend. However, I still have to carry out my main statistical analysis, so I will have to do some tests and to prove the existence of the luxury effect or not in the following months, hopefully. This is just a slide representing the most commonly seen flowers in allotment gardens and residential gardens, just a few pictures. I added Latin names, but I'm sure that you know the common names better than me. And you see that there is quite a good distribution between wildflowers and cultivated flowers in both allotments and residential gardens. However, in residential gardens, I think there is a wider number of common ornamental flower compared to wildflower. Regarding the socio-economic data, so the questionnaire, as far I received 90 responses, so with a percentage of respondents of 82% from all the participants, so I'm still waiting for some responses. I still obviously have to carry my analysis as well, because I'm still waiting for people to complete the questionnaire, but this is just a few examples of some questions and responses from the questionnaire. So on the right you can see, for example, the age of people that have been participating to my studies, and the age is on average a bit lower among residential garden owners compared to allotment gardens plot holders. On the left you see a question about garden management, so how usually people spend each month for garden or plot maintenance, and on average people having a garden spend more in garden maintenance compared to, for example, plot holders. So probably is not really clear, not really clear to read, but this is an overview of the question and responses about the garden management practices in each site. As always, blue less deprived and yellow blue more deprived, yellow less deprived areas. You can see that it's positive to see that most of the bad garden management practices like the use of pesticides, for example, or herbicide is quite low, less frequent in both allotments and residential gardens. For example, mowing is a garden management practice that is clearly more frequent in residential gardens compared to allotment gardens. And it's quite, there is a trend along the deprivation gradient for some of the gardening practices, not all of them, so it will be interesting to carry out some analysis and understand if there is actually a connection between the typology and frequencies of these practices and, for example, the number of insects or the number of flowers in each site. This is another question about the presence of wildlife-friendly features in each site. There are a lot of wildlife-friendly features, but the one with a orange circle are the ones that are more useful for pollinating insects. So, for example, the presence of flowers, bee-friendly plant, or solitary bee houses. And it's nice to see how they are, all of them are quite present in all of the site. And again, I will have to carry out analysis to understand if there is a connection between the presence of these wildlife-friendly features and actually the presence of insects in the gardens or in the plots. So what I'm going to do in the next few months, I will carry out 1 or 2 additional ecological sampling rounds in early springtime, so basically the months that I missed last year between April and June, where I come back to all my sites from last year and collect more data about insects and flowers. And then I will carry out this statistical analysis to find a correlation, possible correlation between data about insects, data about flowers, and all the social factors that I mentioned. And at the end, I hope to have a response to all my research questions that basically are referring to 3 main topics. So first of all, I hope to find out if the luxury effect holds for pollinators in gardens and allotments in cities, if garden management practices can affect the provision of floral sources for pollinating insects, and how these garden management practices can be improved to benefit pollinator in each garden or allotment. And lastly, I want to understand if there is a connection between socioeconomic status, the perception that people have of pollinator, and eventually their mental well-being. So I don't know if it's late, it's early, but thank you very much for listening. I would just want to thank you, my supervisors or my supervisory team, Urban Green Newcastle, because it really helped me in my site selection, especially with allotment gardens, and obviously all the allotment secretaries, the plot holders, and the garden owners that have been involved and that have been so kind and available to give me the access to their garden or plot. So thank you very much.